The Spin-off Podcast Network.
Ryan Reynolds here for, I guess, my 100th Mint commercial. No, don't. I mean, honestly, when I started this, I thought I only have to do like 4 of these. I mean, it's unlimited premium wireless for $15 a month. How are there still people paying 2 or 3 times that much? I'm sorry, I shouldn't be victim blaming here. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/save. Whenever you're ready.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
Does your brand have something important to say through meaningful messaging that reaches the right audience? At The Spin-off, we work closely with our partners to create bespoke campaigns that bring value to both your brand and our audience. If you're interested in learning more about partnering with us, email Beck, that's BEC, at thespinoff.co.nz.
Nau mai hoki mai ki other folds, e mihi nei, ko Duncan Grieve tōku ingoa. My guest today is a return guest after 3.5 years, a reasonable time between folds. It's Hamish McKenzie, the co-founder of Substack, New Zealander from the lower South Island, maybe Clyde, probably wrong, but a person who I've come to be pretty friendly with over the past few years since we recorded that, and who just happens to be in this really, really fascinating position, kind of, Substack's tagline, which he sometimes makes fun of, but I think it's almost more descriptive than it is a slogan, is building a new economic engine for culture. And it broadly still feels true that we know what social media looks like, what it encourages in terms of behavior and how it's impacted society. So, and that's largely because it's an attention and therefore an advertising model. That's his thesis. It's kind of obviously true. Substack is building something off to the side where it's like, no, this is about the direct relationship, a financial relationship, and a community relationship between an audience and what was initially writers, and now, literally as we record this, they just went with sort of the ability to kind of go live with video. So right now, there is the product suite of YouTube, TikTok, Twitter through Notes, and Facebook. Basically, all of social in a single app. Absolutely not with all of the kind of built-out features. But Substack is trying to be an everything app for creators. That's a huge swing. And they're even just making it work from a UX kind of perspective is really, really difficult. I don't even know if it'll work. I'm a person who is a power user of Substack, but I do it largely through email. I like to read writing, so I read writing that comes through there. On the app now, they're trying to serve you video. They want you to sort of interact with text-driven chats and audio, and it's just a lot of stuff. And they want you to discover new things and read your own. It's not impossible, but it's quite a challenge on a small screen. But if they pull this off, the revenue opportunities for the millions of people across the world who either already do or would like to earn a living as creators, people who exist on, YouTube would be the biggest platform, TikTok the next, but there's all these different platforms where it's basically like, we'll give you reach, you figure out the money piece, with the exception of YouTube. So this thing that they're building off to the side, the ambition of it, and if they're successful, and it sort of starts to deflate the balloons of social, and inflates their own, it's just a massive societal shift. It's such a fascinating thing to watch. It's absolutely not uncomplicated, and everything from content moderation to its impact on institutional media are things that we talk about on this podcast. But it's one of my favorite things to watch and think about. in all of media is how Substack is sort of changing the shape of media in an increasingly broad basket of ways. So that's what this is about. It's a return chat with Hamish McKenzie, who is a really thoughtful, open, curious person, and very grateful to have him on the fold. Kia ora, Hamish, welcome back to the fold.
Kia ora, Duncan. It's a pleasure to be back.
Big day for you. I was like 2 hours ago watching the sort of the wide broadcast kind of unveiling of live streaming video for Substack. Tell me how you're feeling when you ship a big product like this.
Yeah, it's really cool when this kind of thing happens. Everyone in the office gets all like locked in and buzzy and like scared of things breaking. Every day we do it, something does break, and then they scramble and undo it, and like there's a big sigh of relief. But it also feels really cool for like forward momentum of the platform and for taking this kind of business model that Substack represents into new quarters. So it's exciting.
I mean, and that's kind of what I watched your interview with Chris Best, Substack CEO, yesterday, and the thing I took away from it was that, that Substack is now starting to conceive of itself as almost like an everything platform in terms of how creators can interact with audiences. So where it started with email and writing, now it's the sort of the whole of the creator economy could conceivably rebuild what they're doing on Substack. Is that the thinking? And what sort of how did you get there?
Yeah, we've always been about trying to build a new media ecosystem with a different set of rules than the one that dominates today. And that means not just building like a platform for paid newsletters. It's the business model, the Substack model can apply to anyone who has thoughts or culture to share with other people. And sometimes those people specialize in writing, and sometimes they specialize in video or audio or podcasting or whatever it is. And I think, one way you could look at it is through a technology lens. We're moving out of the era of desktop and email-oriented Substack and into the era of mobile-oriented Substack. And a ton more people in the world live on mobile than live on desktop. There are probably millions of creators alone who never touch a desktop computer during the day. And so there's a huge addressable market out there who are like spending all their time on Instagram or TikTok or YouTube, who could benefit from the Substack model in the same way that bloggers and journalists and academics and analysts have benefited from the first era of Substack.
Have you started to, I know that you've been kind of starting to do, it's not like the Substack Pro where you sort of paid some writers to come across and sort of de-risk that for them, but there's certainly a bit of an element of trying to entice people for whom video or vertical video is their sort of core medium onto the platform to use all of the tools, but certainly with a nod to if we can start to scale this thing and get enough audience there, we'll see whether we can sort of shift people who wouldn't naturally have come to Substack before, whether as creators or audiences, into that realm. Just talk us through that piece.
Yeah, we're in the early days of this kind of journey to help people understand what the benefits are of publishing on Substack and being a consumer through the Substack app, especially for those who have lived their whole lives on these social media apps. And in the early days with writers, it was like in the very earliest days, it was me jumping into people's inboxes and DMs and getting them on Zoom calls and telling them what Substack is, telling them that I think this model could work well for them. And then we started hiring people when we did that pro program, which is giving people minimum guarantees to de-risk the financial move for them. And then we got more mature as a company and the economy turned. So we stopped doing those kinds of deals and just focused on helping people see the potential of the model for them. And interestingly, from a like behind the scenes perspective, nothing slowed down for us in terms of writer acquisition and creator acquisition. But that early stage of spending the money was good for getting the flywheel going. Now we're trying to get the flywheel going for this new creator class. And some of that is just the old methods that we've always been doing, which is getting on calls with people, getting drinks with them, trying to get the word out about what Substack is, because so many of these people don't even know what Substack is. They haven't heard about it. They're not media nerds or Silicon Valley nerds who already know what Substack is. And some of it's like running a fellowship for people who are TikTok creators but might want to graduate to a more sort of serious long form version of video, or like have a closer, tighter ownership relationship with their community. And so some of it is shipping the features that support those kinds of creators and orienting the products and platform more around mobile. Some of it is press and comms and marketing to try and get the word out to help them even find out what Substack is. And some of it is this kind of a manual work to go and grab them by the collar and drag them over into this new system that we think will be good for them.
There's a few questions that kind of naturally fall out of that. And one is they're sort of trying to be all mediums to all people is really difficult from just like a product design perspective. And I was talking to a colleague, Jen, in the kitchen this morning, who's like, when she goes to the Substack app now, and she's like a Hunter Harris kind of fan, and loves the chat functionality, but starts to find that it's starting to push more discovery at her than she naturally wants. Once you start to layer different mediums and different content forms, different types of creator, is there a risk that you start to sort of poison the well of that kind of beautiful reading experience that was there by kind of trying to make a single screen do too much?
All this stuff is a challenge and it's new territory and nothing's guaranteed, and we don't think that we're going to be the masters who like click our fingers and everything's magically working for Substack. But what we do want to do is preserve the option for people to have their own control, make their own choices about what they see first. So already in the app today, you could make it so that the notes feed, which is the Twitter-like thing that's about discovery, is secondary to the inbox feed, which is like where you have your subscription relationships listed chronologically. I think there is this conventional kind of wisdom, especially in Silicon Valley, about building a single app purpose with a single focus, whether it's photos for Instagram or text for Twitter or short form video for TikTok, etc. And we are cutting against that grain. And the reason I like that as a bet for Substack is because we don't see the format or the mode or the media type as the actual magic, not the actual thing that people are showing up for. We think people are usually showing up for the person or the small team or the publication that they really trust and love, and that they want to ingest culture from those people in whatever way those people want to give it to them, or sometimes the consumer might decide, well, I'm interested in this guy's podcast episodes, but not so interested in his writing, or I love her essays, but I don't love her live videos or something like that. And the ability for the creators to have the choice of what format to communicate in, and the ability for the consumers to have the choice for how to consume, is just a reflection of how like culture already works. I think the spinoff has a ton of great stuff that I can read, but the spinoff also does podcasts. And as a spinoff member, I'm happy that they're doing both. And I think that the kernel at the center of that is the relationship model. I'm subscribing to this person or institution that I trust. It's not actually I only want photos from this thing, or I only want text from this thing. But it does present a challenge. And how do we marry that? How do we put that all together into a single app without making it insanely complicated?
Yeah, and that's kind of part of the challenge. It's interesting though, right? Like, I feel like when we last spoke, I think Substack had sort of just started to get on the radar of the sort of the big giants of social. It was like before Elon bought Twitter, now X, for example. But there was a sort of, we'll just sort of copy some of those features and just put them in our apps. And it didn't really work. I think most of those programs are now shuttered. But the sort of what you're doing now is you start to move closer to some of the core functionality of what they're doing, but with this radically different economic model. Have you, does it sort of risk, or have you seen any kind of signal that they're aware of or concerned by the kind of scope expansion that we're seeing?
Yeah, well, Elon nuked nuked Substack after we launched Notes, which is what he saw as like a competitor to Twitter. And he said in the Walter Isaacson biography, he said that he felt Substack was the number one competitor to Twitter. And I think he saw us as like the paywall to the Twitter experience. So he wanted to own that experience himself. And in the nuking, that was like blocking for a couple of days there, it was like blocking the word Substack on Twitter. And if you search for it, it wouldn't return results for Substack. It would return results for newsletters. And he eventually undid the most egregious of those acts. But some of the things have remained true, like he cut us off from the API. So tweets don't automatically embed in a Substack post. And there is a delay on links. I think this is still true today. There's a delay on links. So if you click on a Substack link, it takes 5 seconds to load. And later on did that to New York Times and everyone, I think, which is actually rational behavior, because the thing that serves Twitter's model is for people to never leave their feed. And it's true of Instagram and Facebook, who did that years ago without having to make a PR storm about it, because that's the obvious thing you do if you're trying to build an addiction feed that is based on engagement and serving ad impressions. So I think they have noticed, Elon's definitely noticed. YouTube today just launched a community type space within YouTube channels that is meant to guard against people disappearing to Discord, but is similar to how Substack thinks of the world, of like integrating all these things that might be part of your personal media empire under one roof. And I think they'll continue paying attention to us. But I think it's a hard game for them to play because they have different business models serving different masters. And so in an innovator's dilemma kind of way, that have to start to really succeed at building a Substack killer, that have to really start eating themselves, really start taking big bites into their dominant business models.
I mean, that's part of the thing that's sort of most, in some ways it feels like your moat is 10%. Like as a take rate, that still sits below OnlyFans, sits below Apple within the App Store, sits well below YouTube's rev share, and the rev share from, like a TikTok or a Facebook, any of the sort of micro content piece providers is, broadly speaking, might as well be zero. Like, is that kind of what gives you the confidence that ultimately the gravity of that will swing across? Because it feels like everyone is just hypnotized by the scale of the audiences that you can develop there, but so few people have managed to build what feel like kind of pleasant, sustainable businesses on those platforms versus, the number of people who seem to be sort of broadly enjoying the Substack environment.
Yeah, I'm not sure if the 10% is the moat, but I think it's a critical ingredient in the overall model. And I think the model coupled with the network effect is a moat. So on Substack, you publish and get subscribers for free just because there are millions of people hanging out there with a willingness to subscribe to other things and being one click away from them. And then the model is you have total ownership of your content and your mailing list, and Substack can only make money when you make money. So our incentives are really aligned. And for YouTube to do that, they would have to sort of prioritize that model above their existing huge ad model and their existing huge platform subscriptions model. And for Twitter to do that, they would have to let everyone own their content and walk with their list. And they have to deprioritize their ad business, which they're hurting on, and they need to prioritize at the moment. What gives us confidence that can hold? I think because we do have a genuine network effect now, like 30% of all paid subscriptions to Substack publications come directly from the Substack network. It's extremely hard to build. And to get that kind of network effect, not many companies ever achieve it. And Patreon, for example, has a good brand. It's extremely friendly to creators. Great company. They prove that people would be willing to pay artists and creators and journalists directly. But they started in a different time, and they had a different approach at that time, which was they weren't going to focus on discovery very much. And now they're in a tough place because they've got the payment sort of processor, but now they have to scramble to try and build a network that gives people subscriptions they wouldn't otherwise get. And so I'm not sure, there are other companies sort of chasing Substack, but they're kind of and directly copying Substack, but they're like replicas of Substack's features without the network effects. And then the social giants would have to become something different. They'd have to have an identity transformation to be able to compete on the same playing field as Substack. And again, innovator's dilemma, our business is young and small compared to their dominant business. So why would they do that? Why would they uproot everything to go after the Substack opportunity when it still seems relatively small compared to what they have?
Do you feel like 10% is enough, in the sense that, a lot of this comes down to how fast can you build things, how robust are your systems, all of the complexities of building scale technology, how, can you afford to, like, video is vastly more data intensive, so you're using the same payment method for something which is just a lot heavier. Do you, like, are there any kind of unseen constraints that are sort of coming out of it that way?
And yeah, it's expensive. We're based in San Francisco. It's incredibly expensive just to pay rent in San Francisco and then hire an engineer. So there are expenses, and they get larger as you get into things like video and audio. So far, I think it's enough for a long time. I think it's enough to get us up to a certain point. It's enough so far to support comfortably more than 3 million paid subscriptions and a staff of about 100 people from world-class companies who work at Substack and are headquartered in an expensive city like San Francisco and have high bandwidth costs for video, etc. But it won't be the only option for Substack in the future to make money. There are other ways that could be interesting to unlock value from the network that helps fund the building of the platform in the future.
Such as?
Well, merchandise, ticketing sales, maybe sponsorships, that kind of thing.
So just still nibbling on advertising without going the whole way in?
Yeah, I didn't want to. I know you'll want to talk about that, so I was just like teasing at it for now. But they also, like, the fee, 10% is a pretty awesome deal at the moment, because you publish on Substack for free and you only start paying that 10% if you're making money. And along the way, Substack is giving you not only these tools that make the experience of setting up and running a media business trivially easy, but also brings you a bunch of subscribers, a bunch of audience, a bunch of customers that you would otherwise have to scrabble or pay for from other places. And so if that network gets a whole lot more valuable, and if the tools get a whole lot better, and if it becomes like such a huge advantage to be part of the Substack network and publishing there, that the 10% starts to seem small, then I think there's room for movement up there. Or there might be ways that you could charge based on the subscribers that Substack drives you might cost you more than subscribers that you bring into the platform yourself from other sources. There's all sorts of options. None of those we're down the road on. None of those we're committing to. We're still in very much growth stage, and all the full unlocking of the economics will come a little bit further down the road.
There's been a kind of a buzz lately around OnlyFans, often described as the best media company in the world, and in some respects the most similar to Substack, in the sense of it's just the thinnest layer between an audience and a creator. You'd probably have read, whether it's Matthew Ball's essay or some of the coverage of that recent kind of window that we got into the economics of it. What do you make of OnlyFans and its similarities to Substack?
Yeah, well, some people have called Substack OnlyFans for ugly people, or OnlyFans for word cells, or OnlyFans for library studies students.
I love them all.
Yeah,
you've got a heap of new slogans to replace a new economic engine for culture.
Yeah, we should just put that on the website. It'd be much easier. I think it's a flattering comparison. It's porn. It's mostly porn. That's an easy content type to attract an audience for. There's high demand for that. But the model is the thing that is super interesting to us. And it's very much the same as Substack, where the platform acts not as a mediator, but as a facilitator of direct relationships. And so I am, in OnlyFans, I would be subscribing to support directly a creator who I trust or love. And then I enter in you can be part of that creator's community, or even being DMing with them or something like that. And that creator gets a lion's share of the revenue and has that direct relationship. It's not quite as pure as the Substack model, because you can't export that mailing list, but it's pretty damn close. And then there's some network effects underneath that help those people get more subscribers and more supporters, or whatever it is, than they would otherwise have got. But you could definitely rip out the porn and replace it with writing, and it'll look just like Substack. And I think this model is of profound importance in the history of the internet, because we've lived 2 or 3 decades now with the commercial internet being based on these, or being won essentially by these models that are built around aggregation and centralized control of those aggregators, and advertising as the main monetization force. And so you have massive social networks that have huge scale, but have kings at the top of them who get to decide who gets attention, who gets money, who gets influence, who gets power. And so Elon Musk gets outsized power as the king of Twitter, and Mark Zuckerberg gets outsized power as the king of Instagram and the king of Facebook, and the Chinese Communist Party get outsized power as the king of TikTok. Whereas the OnlyFans and the Substack approach is much more decentralized. It's much more about power to the people in these direct relationships, which changes the outcome, changes what's produced, and changes how wealth is distributed, and changes what's possible for the types of content that can be made on the internet.
Are you sure that there's no future world where you and Chris and your sort of co-founders become kings of it? Because in some respects, the discover function, the algorithmic nature of it, and the fact that you can kind of, when you launch a new product, for example, like today, that was suddenly in everyone's Substack feed. That's how it, kind of managed to be so widely distributed. What are the kind of restraints that stop you kind of starting to interfere with the with what shows up and what doesn't?
Yeah, it's really interesting. Well, the discovery piece of Substack, the Twitter-like feature in Substack, it's also Instagram-like increasingly, and TikTok-like is like integrated into this feed, because the most powerful discovery distribution systems ever built for media are these news feeds that are on other social media apps. But for us, those are just a piece of the system. And at the root of it lies that direct relationship between the publisher and the subscriber. And the publisher will always have the insurance of having the ownership of their mailing list and the ownership of their content. And so that the discovery features are just sort of options as things they can take advantage of if they want to fill their top of funnel, to like build an audience, just like they might go to YouTube or Twitter or Facebook or Instagram for the same purposes. So Substack might get to have tremendous power over some of the discovery features and the marketing of it. But again, the thing that guarantees the good outcome, I think, or helps maximize the chances of a good outcome for publishers, is that our incentives are aligned. We can only make money when the publisher makes money. And the thing that the publisher wants those discovery features to do for them is to maximize their reach or revenue, preferably revenue. And that's the thing we want to happen as well. So we want the thing that is good for publishers to happen, because that's the thing that's good for us. And there's going to be times where maybe it does feel like Substack has an uncomfortable amount of power, and there are going to be imperfections and some flaws in that kind of system. But it's a massive improvement on the system that we have today, which is dominated by Facebook, Twitter, etc.
If I give them time and space, they'll find something to do, and it will always be educational.
What if a classroom could be a dahlia farm, a converted bus, a forest, or a lounge? Meet 6 families across New Zealand as they contend with the challenges and joys of education outside the bounds of a traditional classroom.
You're being taught by the people who love you.
Watch Home Education on the Spin-Off today, made with the support of NZ On Air. This week on The Spin-Off, we're releasing our most ambitious pop culture project yet. Are you ready? Introducing the top 100 New Zealand TV shows of the 21st century. Our panel of experts and in-house couch potatoes have pulled together a list of countless shows, whittled them down to the final 100, and set about composing this love letter to a quarter century of local television. The countdown is on to number 1. Read now on thespinoff.co.nz.
Kia ora, I'm Duncan Grieve, founder of The Spin-Off. You can help us keep all of The Spin-Off's award-winning journalism free for everybody by becoming a member today at thespinoff.co.nz/donate. Just thinking about your own kind of role within Substack, it feels like you're increasingly like the public face of it and talking about the product and about the thinking in a way that the Substack community kind of pays attention to. And one of the things that you've done in that is kind of have had a fairly consistent critique of how institutional media has evolved in the sort of Substack era in a way. What has prompted that? And I'm just kind of curious to sort of pick at a little bit of the relationship between Substack and kind of more established media brands.
So Chris will typically represent Substack to the world on like business side of things and technology side of things and product side of things, and I'll typically represent Substack to the world when it comes to media and writers and culture, etc. And when it comes to the media and traditional media and relationships there, I'm a like traditional media guy. I went to journalism school, edited the student newspaper at Otago, had a bunch of different journalism jobs at websites and newspapers and magazines, and as a freelancer and then as a book author as well. I have a bone deep respect for journalism and the importance of good journalism. And I want it to thrive. I want it to help as many people get good information that holds society together, etc. and helps us understand each other. And I want journalists to keep their jobs or have economic opportunities in the future. But increasingly, like, the media is in a pretty bad state, and jobs are disappearing. These once powerful institutions, their power has been eroded. Their businesses are anemic. And then with Substack, the response, Substack has some elements where it's in competition with traditional media. Sometimes people are going to choose to spend money on Substack writers instead of the New York Times. Sometimes there are going to be writers who would be happier in a newsroom or who would be very effective in a newsroom, but want to have the independence and greater earning potential of Substack and will go to Substack instead, and maybe that hurts the newsroom a little bit or the newspaper. But I think the traditional media focused only on those pieces when it comes to Substack, have seen Substack only through the lens of it being a threat and missing the huge potential of Substack, and including potential for themselves. Like the spin-off, for example, has a suite of newsletters on Substack that gives them not only good publishing tools and a distinct community that lives on Substack for the spin-off, but a bunch of like traffic as well for stories that are published on the spin-off and the spin-off's other properties. And I think that if the traditional media looked at Substack as an enlarger as something that makes the media ecosystem bigger, then they could see a lot to be pretty excited about. It lets in a whole lot more voices. They can't hire every single Substack writer in the world. There's too many people who are good at this and could do well outside of the institutional structure. They could see those writers as like talent that they could feature in their publications occasionally, or maybe even nurture or invest in. Maybe they can invest in them as being outside their newspapers but successful on Substack, and that helps their news outlets or whatever. They can co-promote events, they can co-promote stories or big projects, work on big projects together. Anyway, the long story short, I think that if the traditional media stopped being in its sort of reflex mode and seeing Substack as another threat from Silicon Valley that it needs to defend itself against, then they could start like relaxing a bit and seeing all the good effects that come from the sort of first successful new media business model that's been injected into the ecosystem in like how many decades? I don't know, 2 decades, and see it as something to take advantage of, because they definitely need that. They need a kind of media ecosystem alternative to the likes of Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, which are increasingly hostile to their purposes and undermine what they're trying to build and achieve.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Like I go back and forth on it, because on one level I agree with you. I think the fact that, like something as basic as sharing links is a sort of a natural thing to do within Substack, and it's increasingly difficult to do on some of those other bigger platforms that were once huge sources of traffic and sort of discussion. But I also think, and you sort of touched on it in your response, but this thing that I detect from you, and I certainly detect from audiences, that there's this natural tendency, and even an institution like the Free Press, which has been built on Substack, that there's a tendency for Substackers and for even Substack itself to, for all that I agree with some of what you've said, to kind of find itself critiquing aspects of institutional media. Sometimes fairly, sometimes I feel like they're cherry-picking sort of particularly egregious examples of a thing that aren't particularly representative of the sort of general flow of a giant institution like the New York Times or NPR, potentially. And there is almost like a gravity towards that. And what that does to the audience is, because these are often very articulate, compelling people saying it, is like, give us your money and your trust and take it away, take both those things away from the institutions. And because $10 going to a single creator or a smaller group of creators versus $10 that's pulled in a much larger pool that's going towards an institution, the sort of power dynamics of it, or what it puts, functionally helps exist in the world, they're quite different, even in terms of the reach of them. Do you ever have some sort of disquiet? Because I do believe you when you say that you're like a huge fan of journalism, but you must be aware of the extent to which a lot of Substack can feel like either an implicit or often an explicit critique of some of the institutions which made you and you love.
There are definitely they made me. There are definitely people who publish on Substack who are vigorously opposed to mainstream media and think it's evil, and think that Substack should be like the refuge in the way that things are done right now. Substack, the company, doesn't actually think like that. But I do think this is a kind of phase shift period where a lot of the models that have undergirded traditional media are failing, and they've been failing spin-off exception, of course, beautiful business.
Never done a thing wrong. Crazy for 10 years.
Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Those models were failing before Substack came along. So this is like, I went to journalism school in 2005, and already the questions were like, why are you bothering with journalism school? I mean, there aren't going to be any jobs in media anymore. And there are some exceptions at the top, like New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, etc., Financial Times, whose business models are robust. They're like global digital giants who are based on subscriptions, and they just get bigger and bigger while the middle gets hollowed out. And then there's a long tail, which is sort of represented by Substack and other niche publications. The upper portion of that spectrum is robust against competition from Substack, in my opinion, and can benefit from it. The middle class was kind of screwed already, but there's nothing coming up to replace it. And there's like no hope for a lot of them with the business models that they've had to rely on for decades before. And what Substack represents is, yes, people have shown that they are willing to pay $10 a month to a single writer, journalist who they really trust, even if they also pay $10 a month to get New York Magazine or The Economist or whatever it is. And I think there's a lot of people like me, like your sort of standard New York Magazine subscriber, who's just going to keep that New York Magazine subscription and subscribe to other like writers on Substack because I care about culture enough to do both. And I think even if it were true that Substack were uniquely the thing that were eroding the business models and the health of things like New York Magazine or the spinoff, then New York Magazine and the spinoff is going to have to figure out a way to make themselves more robust to how the economy is changing. And that means figuring out what's going on with Substack and why that model works, and perhaps trying to learn from it or integrate it or partner with it, rather than sort of worrying about, well, if we just do nothing, do we die because Substack exists?
There's a quote that you pulled out from in a recent newsletter you wrote, which was, "We are no longer comprehensible to each other. We inhabit different systems of signifiers, and all the mediating fantasies have melted away." I wonder, like, if you could talk about what that quote, why you pulled that out, and to what extent you feel like Substack kind of both, because on a great day, I feel like Substack resists it, and on a bad day, it feels like it's kind of part of it too. And I'm just kind of curious to get your sense of what it was about that quote that spoke to you, and then how you kind of feel Substack's role in that culture exists.
Yeah, on one level, I think on the like macro trend level, as a sort of economic phenomenon, Substack is part of the like fracturing of the media landscape that ends up in putting us each into different places on the media globe, and makes it, generally has been making it more difficult for people to cross over borders and get experiences from other places. Like the era of the centralized institution with the voice of God, bringing everyone together around the fireplace is over. It's and again, that's kind of the writing on the wall was there before Substack was even conceived. We're part of that. We're riding that same trend. I think we have opportunities as Substack to mitigate the effects of it in interesting ways. For example, when you take the heat out of some of the debates and the political discourse, then people might be more willing to talk to each other across the aisle. There might be ways to get together in these like collaborative Substack lives, or in a debate that might play out over the course of several long form essays or dialogues, that kind of thing. And then having an ecosystem where it is easy to jump across to discover things in different categories or in different, from different political positions, that makes it easier for you to go out and find the stuff when you want to go and find it, which might be the best that we can hope for. I don't think no one can force anyone to eat their vegetables, really. But I do think the reason I pulled out that quote in that piece, and it was Sam Criss who wrote that, he's a writer based in London, was that I think these other machines that exist, Twitter in particular, but also Instagram, TikTok, they incentivize the misunderstanding of each other. They incentivize the cultural war. They incentivize the sensationalism and polarization and the dunking on your opponent in front of your friends thing. And I think that's got cut out of hand. And it's reflected in the politics and the culture of the world that we live in at the moment. And I bet that a different kind of model that comes to dominate in the media would produce a different effect on society and on discourse. But I might be wrong. It's just a bet. But I think that things are better on Substack than they are on Twitter, for example.
Yeah, look, and I sort of, like I say, I go back and forth on it, but overall, the intellectual quality of the debate that happens on Substack feels like a different galaxy and that's why all the time which I used to spend on Twitter, I feel like I spend on Substack now, and I feel like my brain's better for it.
Yeah, good.
So the other, I think it was was it the start of this year or the end of last year that was the Atlantic published a story about, I think the question was, does Substack have a Nazi problem? And the conclusion was that it does. And there was a period where a bunch of publications, most notably to me, Platformer, ended up leaving. And for a minute there, it felt like that was going to be a sort of a signal to the world that Substack had made a particular choice and that it was going to be moved by the gravity of that. And then people who had a different perspective on how moderation should happen couldn't go there. My sense is now that the sort of broad church of Substack has been sort of validated by time, that enough writers from that community didn't leave and have found that Substack kind of still sort of feeds them and grows, that it's, you have won that argument. Do you want to just talk about what it was like to go through that and whether you do think that that sort of danger that represented of becoming kind of too strongly associated with a kind of more libertarian kind of right-wing ethos has passed, and how you kind of prove that if you do believe that to be so?
I don't know if it's passed. We tend to experience this same debate every 12 months or so. But I do think that the culture has quietened on that front. And an interesting illustrative example is that Casey Newton, who wrote Platformer and a few other, really just a handful of other publications, felt they couldn't countenance our approach to content moderation and therefore voted with their feet and left. Soon after Casey in particular sort of led that protest movement and became a figurehead of it, Mehdi Hasan left MSNBC as one of the most prominent voices there because he objected to the way that he was being treated for his explicitly pro-Palestine views over the war that Israel was conducting in Gaza. And he came to Substack with his new media company, built it on Substack. It was one of the biggest launches we've ever had. And then while interviewed by Kara Swisher, who's a close friend of Casey, at his launch event in Washington, D.C., a couple of months after the platformer left, he said that one of the things that attracted him to Substack was its proven dedication to upholding free press and free speech, and because he wanted to be in a place where he knew that pro-Palestine voices weren't going to be kicked off, which was something that was actually happening on Facebook at that time. And so I think the culture is coming around on it a little bit. It used to be, during the heat of the culture wars, free speech for fucked up reasons got coded as a specifically right-wing value when it's not actually. It's in history, over the course of history, has been much more associated with the left.
Yeah, well, growing up, I remember the Green Party being the staunchest defender of Holocaust deniers coming into New Zealand, and now that if you're of a particular age, the polarity reversal there is kind of startling, even if a younger person might not ever have known that it was the other way around.
Yeah. And the ACLU defended the Nazis marching in Skokie, Illinois. It's one of the famous free speech cases, First Amendment cases in the United States. In defense of the people who were most vigorously opposing our content moderation approach, I think they are rightly, innately skeptical of technology platforms and media platforms, given the culture that we're just still coming out of, because over the last 10 years, we have seen a whole lot of like bad real life events that have been somewhat influenced by bad things happening on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram or TikTok. And partly in response, well, actually massively in response to pressure from the public to do something about the bad things happening on those platforms. Those platforms invested billions of dollars and hired hundreds of thousands of people and wrote intensely complicated policy documents that would run to 150 pages long to build a content moderation apparatus sophisticated enough to mitigate it at the very least, or wipe out, in the best cases, the bad things that were happening on their platforms that might lead to bad things happening in real life. I don't think actually that those efforts have helped. I think they've probably made the situation worse. And it's not because those people or those platforms have bad intentions. And it's not because the people who are agitating for those kinds of changes are bad people who want to like censor the world or anything like that. I think those problems, and this is the piece that is like nuanced and people are still having an emerging understanding of, the problem is that the business models of those platforms reward and encourage and promote the types of behaviors that lead to like a coarsening of discourse and division in society. And that the thing that you need to change if you're trying to fix that problem is not come up with a more complicated censorship regime, but change the business model, change what's rewarded and encouraged and promoted, and give people more control over their relationships with those systems in the meantime. So that's the level of which we're attacking that problem, which is one of the main reasons we started Substack. Fix the discourse, stop this maddening descent that we're all sinking into with the way the media works, by giving publishers true ownership and control, by letting them keep the majority of the revenue and incentivizing them to make money through paid subscriptions, by giving readers and subscribers the ability to opt into and opt out of easily the types of stuff that they want to see in the world or don't want to see in the world, and the ability to vote with their wallets to support the kind of culture that they want to thrive in the world. And when it's that kind of direct relationship, when it's literally over email at the start of Substack, and Substack is a facilitator, not a mediator, then the bar for intervention should be extremely high. So we do have content moderation guidelines that guard at the extremes. You can't have porn on Substack. That's the only sort of non-First Amendment aligned rule of Substack. But otherwise, no incitements to violence, no doxing, no spamming. But other than that, then you should be, as the platform who's mediating these direct relationships, which are about trust relationships between publisher and consumer, you should be extremely reluctant to intervene as the kind of hand of God in these relationships that shouldn't have much to do with you.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, it comes down to how compelling you find that argument, and I find it quite compelling.
Yeah, I mean, people can look at Substack and see how the experience in Substack compares to X, and then come back to me with their findings.
Well, that's the thing, right? Like I sort of struggle with what is a typical experience of time on Substack versus time on those other platforms, and where do you sort of litigate those things, and how do you naturally litigate them? But we'll see how it all plays out. But look, I really appreciate you coming on the fold to talk about this stuff, and hopefully do it again sometime, because it's just such a fascinating kind of A/B test for society and incentives and creators to kind of see which one will out over time.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. It's always nice to chat, and I love the spin-off, so add oil.
Thanks, mate.
Kia ora, this is Toby Manhire, here to urge you to tune in to Gone by Lunchtime, a podcast with me, Annabelle Lee Mather and Ben Thomas, tackling the world of New Zealand politics, from policy to polling, from scandal to psychodrama. Listen to Gone by Lunchtime, brought to you by the Spin-off Podcast Network, wherever good pods are sold.
Are you curious about how business can be better? I'm Simon Pound, and I host Business is Boring, a podcast where I kōrero with some of the most interesting people in entrepreneurship, commerce, and making things happen. Tune in to Business is Boring every Tuesday, brought to you by the Spin-off Podcast Network in partnership with Spark Business Lab.
The Spin-off Podcast Network.